Thank you. Oh, better turn this on. Thank you very much for that more than kind and generous introduction. I appreciate it. I'm very glad to be here. I've learned something, that it's much better to have the food at the beginning of the event than at the end of the event, and impressed to see that. You did mention the Colbert Report, and those, I guess most people know the Colbert Report. It's a terrifying show to go on because you know he's going to make fun of you. And but the one thing they told me before I go on is, remember, he's the comedian and you're not, so don't make any jokes. And I was fine on everything until he, as you pointed out, expressed grave concern about peak wind and what to do about it. And that's kind of the point where I lost it. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here to have this discussion with you. I want to thank the Center for Environmental Law and Policy, and also the the Climate and Energy Institute at Yale, which I'm pleased to be on the advisory board of. And I really want to thank Dean Robert Post, who I've known for a very long time, who very graciously invited me last autumn and said it would be a great thing to come up. And really, this has been the centerpiece of my visit to Yale. So thank you, Bob, very much. And also, although he's not here, I've known Dan Esty for a very long time, and I know a key part of the program. So this is an opportunity, and I thought what I would do this evening is use kind of the quest to talk about some of the major issues in energy, but start talking, frame a little bit what I was trying to do in the book. When I finished the prize, which Doug referred to, I wrote, it was right at the time of the Gulf crisis, and I wrote that, the modern and mesmerizing alchemy of petroleum would continue, and we would continue to be in the age of oil. But that was a couple of decades ago. And with the passage of time, it was evident how so much had changed since then. When I finished that book, there was something called the Soviet Union. Doesn't exist anymore. China was an oil exporter, using oil exports to help finance its economic revolution under Deng Xiaoping. Climate change had no traction as a political issue. It really was hardly an issue at all. No one had ever heard of shale gas. If it had any name at all, it was known as uneconomic gas because it would never be economic. And oh, by the way, oil prices were going to be $20 a barrel. So much kept changing, and indeed, right up as I was finishing the book, Fukushima happened, the nuclear accident that changed what was going to be a nuclear renaissance into a kind of nuclear patchwork in terms of development. And the Arab, what people call the Arab Spring and now call the Arab upheaval, unfolding, upsetting the strategic balance in the Middle East, and still very unclear in terms of what the consequences are for the region and therefore the energy supplies of the region. So much had changed, so it seemed like, good idea to write a book. And the other thing I wanted to do was look at the whole energy spectrum and try and understand how these things all fit together. And so it was really a learning process for me to undertake this book, as the prize is really a process of discovery, of seeing how things fit together. Now, I find that when you write a book like this, it's very helpful to find what I call to myself at least, the emblematic personalities, the people who help carry the story. And in the prize, there were more sort of swashbuckling entrepreneurs and risk takers. I have certainly some of those in this book, but this is a geekier book. Actually, among the many heroes of the scientists are the heroes of this book. And there's one person in the book to kind of give you an example, a chemist at Caltech named Hagen Smit. I checked with the two chemists in the room because I wanted to say no one has heard of him, and I wanted to check to see if they had heard of him. They hadn't heard of him, so I feel fairly confident saying nobody had heard of him at this point. But once a very distinguished professor, won many awards, a great chemist. His particular interest was understanding flavors. So he figured out where the flavor for garlic came from, wine, onions. He's the man who figured out the active agent in marijuana. and it's alleged there's a statue to him somewhere in California for that effect. But he was obsessed actually with the pineapple and understanding the flavor of pineapple. And he was working away in his laboratory at Caltech at the end of the 1940s, and he went outside, probably for a smoke, but into what was supposed to be that beautiful California air that Bob and I remember from our childhood, which he sometimes saw, but instead he encountered what he called that stinking cloud of smog. And at that time, there was this huge debate as to where smog came from. And he said, I'm a chemist, and I can figure it out. And he said he figured it out in the first nickel. He figured out that it came from the improperly combusted gasoline in automobile engines. And so out of that then started a process to regulate emissions. That well-known environmentalist, Ronald Reagan, set up the California Air Resources Board, which is probably the most powerful agency that most people have never heard of, since it sort of regulates the world automobile industry. And the first chairman was Hagen Smit, and started this process that led to the institution of the requirement for zero-emission vehicles, i.e. electric cars. And so, if you look at the Chevy Volts that are coming on the road today, you kind of find that they connect all the way back to Hagen Smit and understanding where smog came from. And kind of what I was doing in this book throughout is trying to understand how things happened, how they came about. Another example was a young scientist who actually graduated with quite a good degree in science. But the market, young people today know it's hard to get jobs, and the market for academics in his field was not good. He started doing tutoring to try and earn some money. Didn't get any customers. He advertised free tutoring, as free samples of tutoring, didn't get any customers. His father wrote a letter to a scientist, said, my son grows more and more unhappy day by day, and he believes that his career has been permanently derailed. That, of course, was Albert Einstein. He did get a job in the patent office in Bern, and in that remarkable summer of 1905, wrote 5 papers that changed the world, one of them about the photoelectric effect. So he really laid out the theory of solar energy, of photoelectric, of solar panels and so forth. It took the space race with the Soviet Union in 1958 to actually get them put to use for the first time as an alternative to the batteries that were going up in the satellites after the Sputnik. And so that was 1958, and here we are today in 2013, more than 100 years after Einstein's paper, and solar has clearly made great progress. Costs have come down. The largest solar company in the world just went bankrupt in the last few days, as noted even on the front page of the Yale Daily News. And it's growing, but it's still a small business, and so kind of driving home the fact that it takes a long time in the energy business for things to change. It doesn't happen quickly. Just a couple of other examples of the personalities who are important. Those who have read the book will know that this is the only book on energy that's ever been written and that ever will be written, I'm sure, that talks about the worst moment in Ronald Reagan's career as an actor. Yes, I'll tell you about it. He, after he was head of the Screen Actors Guild, he couldn't get work. And so, he was sort of washed up. And so the only work he could get was doing stand-up comedy, fronting for a singing group called the Continentals in Las Vegas. Was pretty good at this joke-telling, but actually couldn't, he hated it, thought his career was over, comes back to Los Angeles, phone rings, it's his agent, Ronnie, and he has this job for him, as some in the audience will remember, as the spokesman for General Electric. He signs this contract, which today would be the equivalent of $1 million a year, to go around and just give speeches for General Electric. In his contract, by the way, it says he will not fly, because as he writes at the time, I'm one of those prehistoric people who have a fear of flying. He overcame that when he got Air Force One. It made it easier to deal with. But he, the reason I write about it is because at that point, the United States electricity demand was growing in the way that Chinese energy demand or Indian energy demand is growing at 10 or 11% a year, and it was very challenging for the United States to meet that, and one of the reasons that we had the development of nuclear power to try and cope with it. And the relevance is what we see in the emerging markets today, the kind of challenges that assuring that they have the electric power that they need is now something that's not only of national importance, but has global impact. I'll just mention two other people that helped tell the story. One is I sort of said, well, where did wind come from? Where did the modern wind business come from? And I kind of asked around a lot, and everything triangulated on this one guy named Jim Delson. And so I tracked him down and asked him about it, and he told the story of how he spent New Year's Eve, 1981, atop a wind turbine tower in the Tehachapi Pass in a blizzard in California, trying to get this wind turbine up by midnight. And the reason it needed to be up by midnight is because that's when the tax credits expired. So he gets it up, and then it falls apart, but he got the tax credit. But he says there's got to be a better way of doing this. So he goes off to Europe. He thinks, you know, the Dutch have had windmills for a long time, so he says, well, we'll find them in Holland. But in fact, he ends up in Denmark and discovers is this industry, the sturdy Danish agricultural machinery industry, makes much stronger wind turbines. He starts to import them to California. California becomes the epicenter as well as the birthplace of the modern wind industry. 90% of the wind turbines at one point are in California. And so that's where the industry begins, and generous tax credits and everything. And so, you know, the question of where did the modern wind industry come from, the answer is it's kind of the result of the marriage of the sturdy Danish agricultural machinery industry with California tax credits.